Hello everyone, welcome back to our Accounting 210. In this video, we continue with the chapter 3 job costing. So last time we covered the first two learning objectives. We talked about there are two methods. One is called the job costing, the other called the process costing. And then we kind of talked about the cost flow in the manufacturing companies. So today we start focusing on the main part, learning objective 3, compute a predetermined manufacturing overhead rate and use it to allocate manufacturing overhead to jobs. So now let's get started, okay? This part is very important. It's very important. I would say you definitely will have questions from this part. So make sure if you have any concerns, email me and then read textbook, watch the videos, the net demos in the accounting lab, the library resources to make sure you understand this part. One more time, you definitely have multiple choice questions from this part in your first exam. Okay, so as I say, the title for this learning objective is, I want to highlight some part, right? So first is called a predetermined rate, okay? So it's a predetermined rate. It's a predetermined rate. What's the meaning? It's that you determine this rate before, the beginning of the year. It's a predetermined rate. And we use the rate to do what? Do we use the rate to trace direct material, direct labor? No, we use this rate to allocate manufacturing overhead to a job, right? So we already talked about that. Direct labor and direct material is already taken care in part 2. You can trace them. You can trace those costs. But for manufacturing overhead, it's indirect cost. So we have to allocate. So what's the meaning? Okay, let's think about this. At the beginning of the year, right? So let's just plan for the future. Remember in chapter 1, we said managerial accounting, we focus on the future, right? So now it's 2020, June 1st. But you are thinking about, okay, I'm planning for my next year. So let's say you are thinking about the planning for 2021. And then you have different jobs. We still use building the horse for horses, as your main product. So you have a horse in Edwardsville. I'll just say Edwardsville, right? You have another project in Collinsville, okay, Collinsville. You have another project in where? Maryville, okay, you have another project, have another job in Maryville. So we said, okay, we have 3 jobs, and then each job is different from each other, so we have to use job costing. So we can trace direct material. We say for this job, you use the 20 pounds material, for this job, the direct material, direct labor, everything, all the direct costs. But our task is how to take care of the manufacturing overhead, right? We said the manufacturing overhead we cannot trace, so we have to allocate. Let's say we cannot wait until we finish these jobs. Why? If you wait 2021, it's not good, because maybe in 2020 somebody will start asking, said, hey, how much? Can you give me as an estimation if we want to build a house in Edwardsville? You cannot say, okay, I cannot tell you until I finish building. Most likely, you kind of give them an estimation. So when you have the estimation, you have to already have an idea how much to allocate to the manufacturing overhead, right? So what does that mean? That means we have to have a predetermined manufacturing overhead rate. We have to have this rate before you start working on this job. So you have this predetermined rate at the beginning of the year, most likely. Okay, so now you can see there are some different things we will take care of. But first thing, your predetermined manufacturing overhead will be different from your actual. So that's at the end of this chapter, you have to do the adjustment. You have to compare your predetermined, your estimated. When we call it the predetermined, we kind of also see this is your estimated, okay? So you have to compare your estimated, you have to compare your allocated work with your actual work to do the adjustment, okay? So we got this predetermined rate based on estimation, and then we use this rate to do allocation. At the end of the project, we have to compare our allocation with our actual, because the allocation may be different from the actual. That's at the end of this chapter. That's our last learning objective. But so how do we get our predetermined rate, right? So how do we, what's the meaning is get the predetermined rate? We kind of say, okay, 2021, we estimate, okay, now it's only 2020, we really don't know what will happen in 2021, but we can estimate, right? So we estimate at the beginning of the year, or even in 2020, we estimate in 2021, we totally will have about manufacturing overhead. What's the meaning of manufacturing overhead? All the indirect material, indirect labor, other insurance, other utility, those things. We estimate that based on, you know, the history, based on our record, we estimate maybe it will be totally 100,000, will be 100,000 for these 3 jobs. Okay, now you have 3 jobs, but you really don't know. You don't know if job A is 33,000, job B 33,000, job C is 33. You cannot really know. So we have to get the rate. Okay, the logic is we found out that overall our company total will have the estimated manufacturing overhead is 100,000. And then we find the cost driver, okay? The cost driver, we said, how do we, why we have this 100,000? Because we use machine hours. We just make up a relation. We said, hey, because we have 10,000 machine hours, okay? Because we have 10,000 machine hours. These 10,000 machine hours cause the 100,000 of all the manufacturing overhead. How do we know it's machine hour? The question will tell you, and based on your record, based on your experience, you can generally get a cost driver that drives this manufacturing overhead. So you totally get the rate. You said, okay, so I totally use the 10,000 machine hour, totally estimate we'll have 10,000 machine hour. And this 10,000 machine hour will cost 100,000 of our total estimated manufacturing overhead. So we get our predetermined rate. We got this predetermined rate is 100,000. Sorry, it's 100,000. It's totally is 100,000, right? Sorry, I go to read this one. So totally is 100,000 estimated manufacturing overhead cost, and then this is because 10,000 machine hours. So we estimated the rate is $10 for 1 machine hour. So every time you run the machine for 1 hour, you use the truck, or use the whatever lines you run machine for 1 hour, you have to most likely cost $10 for the manufacturing overhead. So we estimated this predetermined manufacturing overhead at the beginning of this project. So this is your first step. We start having this rate, okay? So we have this predetermined rate even before we start having this job. And then how do you allocate them? How do you allocate, right? So totally you think, hey, project A, project B, project C, totally will give you estimate manufacturing overhead 100,000. And then totally those 3 horses, we have to have 10,000 machine hours. Now you got the predetermined rate is $10 for 1 machine hour. Now you start building the houses in Edwardsville, in Collinsville, in Maryville. And then once you finish the job, so we just use the Edwardsville as the example. Okay, we use this adverse real job as the example. We found out at the end of this job, we look at our record, we found out we totally used 2,000 machine hours. In order to finish this adverse real house, we run the machine for 2,000 hours. Now, the third step, once we have those things, we can allocate. We can allocate the manufacturing overhead to this adverse real job. How do we allocate? We said for 1 machine hour, we think it will cost $10 of manufacturing overhead. Totally, the actual machine hour based on the record is 2,000 machine hours. So for adverse real house, our manufacturing overhead allocated will be $20,000. Total will be $20,000 as the allocated manufacturing overhead. And last step is if we want to get the full cost, right? If we want to get the full cost of our adverse real house, then we have to have a direct labor plus direct material and plus our allocated manufacturing overhead. That's the total product cost for our adverse real house, this job. So I stop here. I hope I kind of give you the general story of this whole thing. The reason is we cannot trace manufacturing overhead, so we have to allocate our total manufacturing overhead to different jobs. How do we allocate them? We have to get a predetermined rate, and then we use the rate to time the actual cost driver. We get the allocated manufacturing overhead. And then we add our direct labor, we add our direct material, we add our allocated manufacturing overhead to get the full product cost for that job. You will say, hey, Professor, that's just the allocation. Maybe it's not that accurate. You are so right. Ideally, we should use the actual direct labor, actual direct material, and then actual manufacturing overhead. That's the ideal way. But in the reality, we really cannot trace the actual manufacturing overhead. So we use the allocated manufacturing overhead as a proxy for the actual manufacturing overhead. Remember, at the end of the year or at the end of the period, once you get all the allocated manufacturing overhead, we have to compare the total allocation with the total actual manufacturing overhead and then to do the adjustment. Okay, I stop here and then we look at all the details later. Thank you. Let me know if you have any question. As I say, you may feel a little bit confused at the beginning. Read textbook, do some practice with me. You will feel much better. I see you next time. Thank you.